Welcome to the Intern Whisperer. We are live here. Well, our listeners won't know this, but we are actually live today at Valencia College in their podcast room. It's so nice to be back on the campus and not be doing this via Zoom.
Yes.
I'm loving it. Loving it. So I want to lead off with the Intern Whisperer tip of the week. So I've been doing this 5-week series about Dr. Gary Chapman, and he wrote a book called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. So each week I'm sharing this. This is week 2, and he said the second appreciation that you can show to your workers is the gift of service, acts of service. And that can be just like going out of our way to help somebody like Matt. Matt's over here going, here, how do I do this? And I have to hand him my phone and go, here, talk to him this way. And that may seem really small and insignificant, but yet it's huge, right? Because it really solved a problem. Now that's like an emergency one. But another act of service, does anything come to your mind, Xaulanda, in the workplace?
Yeah, actually, I think that having a spirit of coaching, right, where colleagues are able to help each other navigate maybe a particular situation, and it's not prescribed by the role. It's just the spirit of being able to exchange information and support each other as they're going throughout their daily work activities is an act of service. I think there's opportunities for colleagues or coworkers to engage with each other in a spirit of coaching where you're helping someone navigate throughout their daily activities, and it's just being of service to that person, and sometimes we take for granted how that very small act has such a big impact in somebody's life.
It does.
So
It does. It absolutely does. Okay, so today's guest, Matt, is Xaulanda Simmonds. I have the last name, Emmanuel.
Yes,
the
I have a
hyphenated
long name.
You do. Anyway, I've known
throws
Xaulanda
people off
for 3 years. I think it's going
about
on
3 years. Yeah.
And we are both in the organizational development space. I don't know if you know what that is. Do you?
I do not know.
All right. Well, we'll tell you later in the show. But basically, it's like a function of HR, but organizational side of it. Anyway, we've known each other that long. She was a presenter at the Greater Orlando Organizational Development Network, and I just loved their presentation. We'll talk about that too. But she's an amazing woman, so she's on my favorite list.
Oh, that's sweet.
You are.
Feelings are mutual.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, so we are over here at the show, and we're going to be talking about what are the 5 words that you would use to describe you.
5 words I would use to describe me. I would say I'm definitely an introvert, which surprises a lot of folks.
It doesn't me, honestly.
Good. Yeah, I think I'm very much an introvert. I need to be recharged alone in quiet spaces, even when I'm, doing public speaking and other things that are exciting, but they drain my energy. I would say that I am very organized.
You are. I agree.
I'm one of those people that live by my calendar, and I take a lot of notes, and I have a planner, and it helps with time management because I have a lot going on, as many people do. I would say I'm multifaceted, and I like to, one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is not to compartmentalize as much, and I think 2020 has helped us with that, in that, before when I was younger, I was the same person, but I showed up at work maybe a little bit differently that I would show up in my social setting or with my community or with my family. And now the nice thing is that I am less compartmentalized and I'm able to show up authentically in all spaces.
That's a really nice way of describing that, because many times I've seen this on TV where people go, they're yelling at somebody and they go, hey, picture, and then they stop, and then they go back yelling. It's like, really? Which one is really you? Because you were just yelling at me.
So introvert, organized, showing up authentically. Another one I would say is I'm a very good listener.
Oh, yeah.
I tend to be in meetings with a lot of individuals and I don't really say much. And that's usually because I like to show up in the observer role, because I think you learn more about that person, about the situation, about the context that you're talking about. And you are able to capture things that a lot of people miss.
That is true.
Yeah. So I usually come in at the end and say, okay, this is what I heard. I think these are what our next steps are. Did I get that accurately? And everybody's like, yeah, that's it. So that's usually my role. So that's 4. And then I think the 5th one is, I hope my friends would concur that I'm just a really good friend. I try to show up for my friends. My love language is quality time. So I'm not big on gift giving. I mean, I do, but if I take time,
the gift of time is something I value very,
because
very
that's
much.
the only resource we can't pay it forward. We can't roll it back. We can't store it. So if I've decided to spend my time with you, it's because I value you. I appreciate our relationship, and I think we can help each other. So that's my 5 words.
That is really, really cool. So the next question, and I have to kind of toggle back and forth here. What did you want to be as a career? When did you know whatever you wanted to be? Because like I knew when I was 12, but how about you?
Well, what I wanted to be growing up as a child is not what I ended up doing.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to be a lawyer.
Oh my God. That's what I said too. Last week we talked about that. It's like everybody wants to fight for. When is your birthday?
January. I'm a Capricorn.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah,
And mine's
yeah.
October, but I went, oh, maybe we're the same. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, when you're younger and 7 years seems like a long time, maybe it might have been better off me being the lawyer, because I'm working on my PhD right now, and I've been in school way longer than
right? It's all about the
7
defense.
years. So
Yeah, that's very, very true. So how about school? Where did you go to school? How did you end up from here, where you are here? But take us back to that place. Like, how did you get started?
So I'm originally from a very tiny little island you can barely see on the map called St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands.
Wait, we've all heard of St. Croix. It's a vacation destination spot.
It is a vacation destination. Well, I happen to be from there. So I get to live my vacation every day while working, of course, and making a living. But I'm originally from St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. Education-wise, I did a lot of public and private school. From K to 12. And then I did my bachelor's degree at the University of the Virgin Islands, which is a historically Black college. I did my master's in business administration with a concentration in healthcare administration, because at the time I was working as a healthcare executive at the only hospital on St. Croix. And I felt that that was helpful in my role, but also to be able to serve the patients in my community. And now I'm working on my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. And my dissertation topic is on work passion.
So because we introduced this concept earlier, let's go ahead and tell our listeners, what is industrial organization? And then Matt will be in the know.
So basically, IO is, we look at it from 2 perspectives, the scholar and the practitioner model, right? So it's the study of psychology as it relates to the workplace. And so there's a lot of research behind it. So the scholarly part is really doing that academic research to be able to come up with sound strategies and best practices to be able to apply within the workplace. It's often closely linked with HR, but it is a specialty of its own. And it also involves like organizational development or consulting or psychology. It's kind of like a blend, I think.
And we measure everything.
Yeah.
NOD, everything.
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 Yeah.
So what would be the distinct characteristics that would separate it from HR?
We don't necessarily, we can be involved, but our primary function is not to recruit, hire, do the application process or benefits and things like that. It's more looking at it from 3 levels. You're looking at it from the individual level, you're looking at it from the group level, and you're looking at it from the organizational level. So really taking a micro to macro look of what's happening within that organization. So a good example that might help you understand is if you look at organizational culture. So right now, after 2020, there's all these talks about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how do you create these equitable workspaces. Well, IO and OD play integral parts in that, because then we look at the organizational climate, the organizational culture? Is it supporting an inclusive environment? Does it have diverse people? And then you filter that down to the groups or departments or units and how are they functioning, and then to the actual individual. So as you think of my dissertation topic, I'm focusing on the individual and how they can be excited to show up at work on Monday mornings, which many people dread, right?
Right.
Because unfortunately, according to the data, about 70% of American workers are disengaged or actively disengaged.
Just on Monday mornings? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was
No,
going to
it's
say.
not just Monday mornings, but Monday morning is usually the time after you had that nice long weekend, especially after a Labor Day weekend.
Absolutely.
And you have to go to work. You're like, do I really need to? But how do you create an environment in the work
where people look forward to coming
where
in.
people look forward to coming into work?
Yeah.
Yeah, and being productive.
I think part of that issue that's at stake here is that people go, am I safe going into work? You know, some people will say, I do not want to have to wear a mask. I do not want to have to go and get a shot. Why is all of this happening? But yet they're social people. And
Right.
even though yourself, you shared that you are more of an introverted, and I'm going to take a step back just so our listeners know. An introverted personality and an extroverted doesn't mean that we're shy.
No.
Or that we're outgoing. It's how we process information and where we get our energy from. So
Yep,
I'm
absolutely.
extroverted. I get lots of energy from being around people. I need separation from my work and my home. I don't like being confined in there. It feels like prison to me, honestly. I know that introverted processors, many times when I'm talking and I'm explaining something, because I have to talk out loud to process my thoughts, the introverted person's sitting here looking at me and going, are you ever going to get to the point? Like, are we going to get around this block? Is this the fourth time we're going around the block? And so that's when I began to get a cue, and I was taking all of my PhD classes, and I went, oh my God, it makes so much sense. And it really helped me to improve how I communicate to others.
Yeah, we process internally and then
Yeah.
we speak. And the extrovert usually processes by speaking out loud, which is, there's not a right or wrong. They're just two different approaches. So once you understand that, then,
Yeah, it's really helpful.
yeah.
And then when you were also talking about, we were talking about culture, this was coming up in our conversation yesterday when we were talking about being on the show. We were saying how you can look at websites and yes, they will either look culturally diverse because they have all the right colors on the website, but is the culture actually really inclusive? Is it also reflecting diversity? And that doesn't mean just in race.
No.
It's obviously all types of people, personality types, for example, like we were just
Absolutely.
talking about.
Yeah. I think when we think of diversity, people automatically think of race and ethnicity.
Oh, always.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like the default. But diversity is much more multidimensional than that. You can look at diversity from the perspective of age. Right now we probably have more generations within the workforce than ever
5.
before. Yeah, so there are 5. You can look at it from the perspective of a disability or abled bodies. That they like that more PC term. But whether it's innate, is it something that you're born with, or is it something that you've acquired? Right. Then of course you have the race, you have the ethnicity, you have the spirituality. Right?
Birth order. There's so many
Yeah.
variables, layers. And I was explaining this today on one of my meetings that I had is multidimensional. We need to really look at how people absorb because it really is unique, just like a fingerprint for each one of us. So we've been trying to make it standardized when, yes, to a certain extent, it can be standardized, but really it's not.
It's very, very complex to standardize it. When you think about diversity, think of all the elements of being human.
It's too much to think of.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's interesting that socially we've sort of been conditioned to initially see somebody from there and say, oh, and we want to put them in a box because it makes it easy for us. But one of the challenges that I always express when I'm speaking to people about diversity is the way you perceive the person may not necessarily be the way that person perceives themselves. And so if there's a disconnect with that, that causes dissonance, right? Especially when it comes to the interaction. So let me give you an example. I show up or I am perceived as African American, right? I don't perceive myself as African American. I perceive myself as Caribbean American. Do we have a lot of things in common with those two, between African Americans and Caribbean Americans? Absolutely. But culturally, there's nuances that make it very distinct where we may not understand each other. So that's where it's really peeling back, opening the book and looking at the pictures and trying to understand all the different dimensions of an individual so that you're able to connect with them in a more meaningful way.
So think of it as ancestry.com also.
Yes.
You have all of those generations of like, where are you from? And then you can go, oh, well, I'm Irish also. I am not from the Caribbean. I had said this last week, a Latin wannabe. And I think Latin and Caribbean cultures are so familiar oriented and they're so warm and friendly and everything. I go, gosh, I want that. I want to be in that family.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at some point, I think as the demographics begins to change and we start to see the minority majority shift, at some point, maybe in the far future, we'll just all be in the same pot.
I agree. I absolutely think that's totally possible.
Yeah.
Totally. I had read a report. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. It said by 2020, the Hispanic Latino population was going to outnumber the Caucasian population. I don't think that's happened yet. We're in 2021,
We're
but it's
tipping
pretty.
the point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we're
getting pretty
tipping
close.
the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're right now in Orange County, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, 50% of every baby born is Latino.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
not
I think
white.
that they're almost a lot mixed now. So many people. They're open.
Yep.
So I don't know, Matt, did that answer your question also?
Yeah, absolutely. Now I have just a million more questions on like how we tackle
ask
that
away.
problem and where do we even start to begin to, empathize with people on a level where we're not, like not making judgment, but making assumptions just based off of like, where do you even start with tackling that? Who do you talk to? Is it upper management? Is it on a work by work basis? Like,
Now you're talking change management, and that's another OD thing.
yeah,
Yes.
I just don't even know where you would begin to start educating people on this, where they can, start really practicing, integrate or practicing diversity as opposed to just doing it to meet a quota, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, how do you teach people to practice this so they can like turn that like judgmental whatever in their brain off and just.
Well, I think before you try to change anybody else, you have to start with self-awareness.
Right.
And where there are opportunities for you to change. So the reason I say that is I, in my studies, took the Pamela Hayes addressing model. And it talks about age, disability, race, ethnicity, spirituality, socioeconomic status, indigenous heritage, nationality, and gender. Those are just the elements that she encourages people to do a real self-reflection to understand where you have privilege and where you may be marginalized. And that's a whole nother conversation when we're talking about power and privilege over being marginalized and underrepresented. But what I found with that and with people I've shared it with is that we have unconscious biases that we may not even be aware of. And those things tend to infiltrate how we interact with others. And it's not necessarily something that we intend. It's just either based on our environment or based on the way we were raised or the experiences that we've had. So I feel like before you can change anybody else, you need to start working on yourself, right? And getting the self-awareness of where you might have bias, where you have privilege, where you may be underrepresented. And then with that awareness, then reach out to others who you have an interest in learning more about. So for example, Isabel said she's a incognito Latina, right?
I'm a wannabe. I'm
She's
a wannabe.
Latina.
I'm
So-
not, but I sure want
You
to
just
be.
got upgraded.
And you got upgraded.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, you could pass. Somebody could categorize you as
Yeah.
Latina, right? And that's where it goes to being perceived and self-identifying. So from there, you reach out to different diverse groups that you may have interest in. You have those exchanges of culture, and that cross-pollination and exposure helps to demystify some of the things that you may not know, but it helps you to better understand somebody else's perspective, right? And so in organizations, that's where, when we talked earlier about that peer-to-peer, there's an opportunity with that peer-to-peer, because usually the colleagues that you get along with may be very much like you, but there's likelihood that there may be people that you get along with at work that may not be like you in certain factors. And how do you broaden that awareness and understanding? And then from there, of course, you work on the team. you know, and then having a culture within the organization that's going to be able to support that exchange, that cross-cultural exchange. And inclusion is a big word, including different people, but I make the very distinction between inclusion and belonging, right? Inclusion to me is a certain set of actions to make someone feel included. Belonging is an emotional feeling of being included. So there's a difference.
I think that's what it takes is
Yeah.
it takes a mindset to say, yes, I do belong. Instead of maybe playing maybe a victim and thinking, oh, people are treating me mean and I don't belong here. No, you do belong there. And if you want to belong there, then decide, yes, I belong here and own it.
I agree with that to a certain extent. I think that from the individual perspective, you can make that decision that you belong there.
Well, I can't change anybody else's mind.
Right. But
right.
right. And it's not about, you can't change anybody else's mind, but then there's also systemic issues that make it challenging for you to belong depending on certain factors. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So there's that mindset. And so when we were talking about diversity and inclusion, I'm sure you've heard this was all going around last year. It's being invited to eat dinner, but you actually don't get to eat, you know. So inclusion makes sure that everybody feels welcome to come in there and participate. I find it interesting that, you know, again, we have such a focus on race and ethnicity more than like, okay, we're women. And how hard is it to be a woman in the business world? We were talking about that too. And so, you know, it's sometimes, and then there's age. And at what age do you become more invisible? Because in American culture, we focus on, oh, you got to be 20 to 30 to be, and you have to look a certain way to, and that's really where I guess spirituality comes in. I go, okay, so I look for the way that I never mean for my show to be spiritual, but it is to a certain extent of who I am. I should see you for who you are on the inside. It doesn't matter what's on the outside, all of us. And if we all looked at like, what are the things that I love about Xaulanda? And I had not talked to her in the longest time, and I've been following her on like LinkedIn and went, I'm just going to call her and see what she's doing and just catch up. And so we did, and it was like really great. And I said, could you come on my show? And she did, and she's here. And so it just feels like old times. And so to me, that's what inclusion is the ability to feel really comfortable around somebody. And just like you were saying at the beginning, just be yourself and not worry about, oh, do I fit into this, whatever the occasion is or the
context.
The context,
It's interesting because as you were talking, it took me back to when I was an executive at the hospital. And I was one of maybe 3 women total at that executive level. And consciously or unconsciously, now that I think back, it was probably more conscious than unconscious. We decided to wear pantsuits every day to work.
How did that go down?
So not only pantsuits, but like 3-inch heels. And the reason, and I'm already very tall, right? Generally speaking, but 3-inch heels. And the rationale was, if we wear pantsuits, we would be perceived a little bit more masculine and we would not distract with like a skirt. And the rationale behind wearing the heels is that when I speak to the CEO and my fellow VPs or chiefs or whatever, we're at eye level, right? And so it's interesting because my daughter, who just graduated from college, is, you know, job searching and she's getting all of her career wear. And I unconsciously found myself trying to steer her into pantsuits. And she's like, Ma, I don't want to wear that. Our generation doesn't wear that. And so we had this extensive conversation about the loft and what they're carrying now. And I'm not endorsing any particular company, but she was like, you know, it's like we're showing up as we are, but we're at work. It's not showing up a certain way because you're at work. And so I found that very interesting because I saw it as a learning opportunity. I was like, you know, I wish I had that presence and that sense of who I was to be able to show up authentically at that time. But, you know, back then,
but she's lucky
different.
she was raised by you, and that's a totally different again, you're looking at a different generation. You're looking at, how everything historically, what was going on as she was growing up.
Yep.
What is the technology, and then who is her mother? And that mother has also formed her own opinions and helped influence and shape her thinking.
Yeah, that's the beauty of your generation, right? Because I think you all are a lot more open-minded, and that's at least what I learned from my daughter. I think we've become like more of that peer-to-peer coaching we talked about earlier. When you're a parent and the child, you're usually trying to direct the kid, and then when they go to a certain age, you become more of that, like, peer-to-peer.
And it's also reverse mentoring too. And that was part of the presentation that I did. So the younger mentors up.
Yep.
And I find that to be true. Everybody I've worked with, I know they're mentoring me, they're teaching me, they're mentoring me as much as I do. And so we find this common ground, and that becomes the culture.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so you've been working on your PhD, and you mentioned that. So let's talk about that paper then, just a little bit more.
I'm in the middle of writing my dissertation, and it's daunting. I'll be so happy when I'm done. But basically, with work passion, I'm building on previous research that was done by a researcher by the name of Dr. Andre Zagarmi. And him and his colleagues came up with an employee work appraisal model. And what that model does, it looks at not only the organizational characteristics, kind of like work climate and things that we talked about, but also the job characteristics, the relational characteristics, or the relationships you would have at work, through the lens of how an employee is continuously appraising that environment, right? And based on that appraisal model, the employee would then either develop positive, harmonious work passion, or a little bit more obsessive work passion, which is like being a workaholic, and it's detrimental to other factors of your life. But it also influences their intention, whether they intend to stay and how they intend to work, right? And so that's what my research is really honing in on. But where I'm building on his previous research is by looking at motivation, looking at diversity work climate, and also mindfulness, because mindfulness, if you're more present, if you have coping mechanisms, especially for stressful situations, and my focus is on healthcare middle managers, and we know what's going on in healthcare, right? Since
They're
2020.
suffering.
They're suffering,
seriously
right?
suffering.
And it's interesting because I chose my topic before 2020 happened, and I did not understand the reason why. I just felt this urge to include healthcare middle managers that self-identify as people of color. Because there's not much research out there as it pertains to middle management. There's a lot on physicians and nurses, but not a lot on middle management. And when you think from the organizational level, you have like the executives, which are at the C-suite, you have the middle management, and then you have frontline employees, right? Well, the C-suite comes up with the strategy. The frontline employees are the worker bees. Those are the people who are actually getting the work done. The middle managers, I like to call them the translators, right? They translate what that strategy is into action items and tactics and ways for their staff to be able to execute the work. So if you ignore a whole layer within the organization, it's almost like an invisible layer of the organization. So I felt very strongly to focus on middle managers in that regard. And then another hidden part is just people of color, right? Either it's not as explicitly expressed or they're not focused on within the research. So that's where I'm adding to the literature there.
So one of the things that I have not started my dissertation, but I consider the study that I did for Intern Pursuit a little mini dissertation for sure. And I was looking at the mid to senior level development of being able to upskill. Now, wouldn't it be nice in this beautiful, positive world that we could live in that not only are we being inclusive and we are embracing diversity, you know, what makes us all unique, but yet everybody, we love kumbaya moment, right? But we could make sure that we were accelerating the learning process. So that's what I'm proposing. I am proposing that by working with an intern, not only does that intern in 3 months, they should be able to be, that should be equivalent to 1 year of work experience, but that should also accelerate the mid to senior level person that is their mentor in their own skills. And so I really, what my original dissertation topic was going to be was servant leadership. And the impact.
That was mine too.
Oh, man.
I was following Robert Greenleaf
Oh
forever.
my God. I have a book that he autographed.
You're kidding
I am
me.
not.
Oh my gosh. So when
Yeah.
you talked about active service in the beginning of the,
Yes.
that's immediately what I thought of servant leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was going to be servant leadership and the impact that role model has on employee engagement, retention. Retention is everything, but also happiness. And so I was looking at that. Those are 3 really big variables. And now
Right.
we know, here we are in 2021, people move from place to place. Like you're lucky if they stay 3 years, honestly. And one of the things that one of my companies that I use that's a vendor, HubSpot, does to encourage engagement and also retention, they say if you work for 5 years, you are going to get $5,000 and you get a whole month. Go do what you want. It's a sabbatical. Do what you
Wow.
want. And then they still have vacation on top of that, right? So I went, that's a really good incentive. So you can, for those that are, obviously motivated by money, keep people in place by money. But what else would keep people in place is the fact that we have relationships. And so I felt that by somebody having to have peer and reverse mentoring going on, I think it actually allows the senior person to get a little more humble and realize, you know what, I don't think I know everything. Because
we don't.
We don't. If this is like all knowledge, and for our listeners, I'm holding my arms out all the way, all the way across. And then you put your hands together like, you're praying. That's how much you know is what's in between your palms. Because you think you know a lot and you know nothing. However, going back to the scenario, I sat there and I went, but what if we could accelerate the amount of learning that is going on? And, my initial study was showing, yes, it improves organizational processes. And I'm going, man, I've got like this really great outcomes that are all coming out. I'm going, I think this is the fountain of youth for people that are trying to upskill and be relevant. So anyway, that's what my dissertation topic is going to be on.
Exciting.
I'm going to pick some of those, but I think retention is the biggest thing because that's what people struggle with the most is how do we keep our people engaged, keep them happy, but we don't want them leaving and bouncing from place to place to place. So if it's built around real relationship and really acts of service and the things that we know are truly the big things in life that truly matter to people, then I believe people would stay. Because there's no reason.
I agree. And I think that when we look at work, the actual work, I think having meaningful work and having autonomy to do your work are key components. One of the reasons I decided to do my PhD is I was working at a company in Minnesota. And when I joined in a managerial role, I had a team and some people just did not talk to each other. They did not like coming into work at all. And I was like, okay, you don't need to talk to each other outside of work, but you got to talk to each other at work, right? I was like, I could understand. And I said, you know what? Let me figure out what it is that each of these employees are good at and what it is that each of these employees have strengths in. So I use Strength Finder for each person to do the assessment and figure out where their sweet spots, is what we used to call them, were. And what I found is that while the job description said what they did,
The
tasks, not all the tasks, because not every task you have for your job you like.
Right.
But not, how do we integrate more of the tasks that they're really talented and excited and is in their sweet spot, so they're enjoying their work more.
So they show up in the morning.
So they show up in the morning. And so what we did was a lot of team building, but what was supported by that is that the organization had 24 expressions of company culture, and there were 24
That's
values.
a lot.
It is a lot. But when you think about it,
2 per month.
well, what I did was I focused on one value per week with my team. And then in the middle of the year, we started from the beginning again. And so when we had our weekly meetings, we focused on that value. How do we show up with that value? So one of the values was servant leadership. So how do you, as a receptionist at the front desk, right, greeting our employees and clients coming in, how do you show up as a servant leader? Right? And so those are the type of conversations that we had, but it was nice that the company had those values clearly outlined. And then as a team and as individuals, we say, okay, how do I show up in my power and the things that I like and honoring this value? And we all show up differently, but we're still showing up within those values. And I thought that was really, really powerful because it's the relationships, yes, but it's really helping people to work within their sweet spot. So when I'm not excited about work, I know that I've been dragged into tasks that they may be necessary, but may not be where my sweet spot is. And then I'm like, okay, how can I do more of the things that I like to do? Right.
And I think that's also where design thinking, teaching people how to play, and it's okay to play.
Yep.
One of the things that my biggest life lesson came from teaching Sunday school. And by teaching 2 and 3-year-olds, I realized they all want to be liked. They want to be loved. They want to be accepted. They need hugs. They want to be heard. And I went, that's really what
everybody wants. That's what
Adults
everybody
want.
wants when you think about it.
Yeah. So then I was going, okay, so how do you bottle that and put that in there? And it's really all of these things that we're talking about right now is just be yourself. It is not all about you. It is also about us. And if you watch like 2 and 3-year-olds, they're very assertive. If they want a toy, they're going to go take that toy, and they may bop you on the head with it. And it has nothing to do with what color you are, how old you are, what gender you are. It has nothing. It's just going, I want that.
Yep.
And so what you end up teaching them is how to get along, and it doesn't matter. So we have to kind of go back to like that
basics.
type of a mindset when teaching adults, so they remember, okay, it's not about you. We have to play nice on the playground. It doesn't matter what the person looks like. Don't do that. Just love them.
And it's interesting because as you were talking, it reminded me of performance evaluation that I had from one of my former CEOs. And I remember he put on the evaluation, you're an exceptional worker. You're an exceptional manager. I got the Manager of the Year award.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. That was a long time ago.
It doesn't matter. Congratulations.
Thank you. But he said, you take things personally. I was like, what do you mean I take things personally?
But in the right way.
No, he goes, that's something you need to work on. And I said, what do you mean I take things personally? I take my work. I feel like my work is...
You're passionate about it.
I'm passionate about it, but the quality of my work is almost like my signature. So, from that I take it. He's like, no, you take things and I was livid. And
you were taking it personally?
I was taking it personally, and I could not understand why he kept telling me that. So what I did was... I started to think about what he meant, not the way I was filtering it, right? When he said I took things personally. And I said, okay, the best way to look at that is if I was in a situation in this same context, interacting with, say, for example, a coworker, and I'm feeling like I'm taking it personally, is that person going to react differently if I was somehow plucked out of this and somebody else was there? Same with my reaction to that person. If we were in the same context, having the same conversation, and I plucked that person out, would I respond the same way if somebody else was in? And so I started thinking about it from that perspective because that allowed me to stop personalizing it. But having that constructive feedback...
Yeah, but you didn't accept it as constructive feedback.
I didn't
right away.
initially, right? Because I couldn't understand. But then when you take time, that's where that SelfAwareness comes in, right? That was a blind spot for me. But having a manager who honored me enough to tell me, Xaulanda, you take things too personally, while I didn't like it at the time, challenged me to do that self-reflecting. And to figure out, and when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's almost like the same thing. Like if you're having that context and that conversation with somebody who is like you and you respond a certain way, would you respond the same way if that person was very much unlike you?
Yeah.
It's easy to take a step back and for a lot of us and like kind of look at yourself and reevaluate and not take things personally and try to correct things. But for a lot of people, it's not. So how do you start motivating people to start taking a step back and reflecting on where they can improve? Like, I'm not talking about necessarily changing people, but making people more aware of how, like, maybe not everything that they're doing is correct. And
I think it's
that's tricky.
It is tricky, and I think this is how I approach it. I can't speak for anybody else. The way I approach it is, what disservice am I doing to that person by not being honest with them, right? And just because you're honest doesn't mean you need to be brutal. You can be honest with compassion, right? And if you're coming from a perspective where you're saying, listen, I know this is going to be hard to hear, but I'm saying it because I love you, or because I care about you, or because I want to see you succeed. It's coming from a good place, and you try to be tender in your communication. People receive it a lot better than if you're being brutally honest, right? And then the other factor that I look into is, okay, this might be an opportunity for me to share something with this individual, but are they ready?
Yeah. Those are good points, and I'm going to add on to that. I believe, Matt, to answer that question, it also includes building some trust first. And trust can be established very, very quickly. It doesn't mean that it has to take place over years or months or weeks. So one of the things that I think that we can all do is that we can smile at people and just let them know, like, the touch, those 5 languages of appreciation. Touch is one of them. Just, hey, I love you. And I had asked her, I said, hey, can I give you a hug when I see you? Is it okay? She's going, yeah.
We went through all the whole state. Did you been vaccinated? Have you? Yeah, okay, good.
vaccinated, consent, all of it. Just get it out of the way.
Yeah, get it out of the way.
Sign this and I'll
Yeah,
hug. We're good.
no signature. But we were just so happy to see each other. It was awesome.
So trust is, important to establish that right away. When I was teaching middle and high schoolers, that's a tough crowd to break through, middle school especially. And they either like you or they don't like you. And so I had to win their trust. And I was able to do that honestly within the first day, and by a strong bond in the beginning, it happens right away. Secondly is when you have trust, a lot of what you were saying is like spot on. It's actually saying, so I really do like you a lot, and I'm going to tell you something that you need to hear. It's not going to be what you want to hear, but you need to hear. I think it's the tone in which you are saying something. So I had this one student that was in the classroom with me, and his name is Tyrone. And he had swagger. He had serious swagger when he would come in the room. And he ruled the school. And this was, like middle school still, but they listened to him. And when he was in there, he was determined he was going to make my life very difficult. And I had to go up to him, and I knew in my head that I was going, ooh, I need this kid to be on my side. As a public classroom teacher, you sit here and you go, if I was to get rid of every person I didn't like in my classroom, I'd have one student left out of 200. That's not realistic. Those are not good numbers. So I went over to Tyrone, and the whole class is watching. And I got up like this, his ears right next to my mouth and my nose.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so
was
long
making a
ago. Yeah. But it's just like right there. And I said, so this is what and he's at risk. He's in an at-risk class. So, let's just add more fuel to the fire. So I said, so tell you what, I need you and I to get along. And what I will do is I will show you such great respect in the classroom. But what I want from you is when I ask you to do something, to please do it. So when you walk out of this classroom, I don't care if you say I'm the biggest F&B there is. I don't really care. But in the classroom, we need to get along. Do we have a deal? And he's like all, kind of sitting back and low rider on his chair, his desk and everything. And he just he's looking straight the whole time I'm talking to him. He just barely nods his head. A little, like half of an inch nod. And the whole class is watching. And from that point on, he did whatever I asked. Because I didn't try to make it confrontational. So you have to read the room, I think, also, when you're trying to do those kind of things. And you have to speak. It's not all about me. It's about somebody else. And remember who you're talking to, and let them hear in your voice that, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like we're going to disagree. And that's going to happen. So in the workplace, like in my company, stuff happens. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be angry. I'm angry. I'm not happy. But the point is I just need some time to process it And it doesn't change how I feel about the people. I love my people. I love them. I may not be happy about something that happened and it's messing up my schedule or whatever it is that's supposed to be happening, but it doesn't change how I feel. I separate those. It's just like, your parent, usually your parents love you no matter what, but they may not be happy with it. So I think that there's these things about letting people know that you care for them,
Right.
you like them, because people do want to be liked. I go out of my way now to tell people I like you, because people don't expect that. That's one of those things. What does that mean? Then they're going, well, what does that mean? Is there something there?
Like you. That's
no,
what it means.
I like you. I like hanging out with you. You're funny. You're this and you're that, and it helps take the guard down. And then you can say things to people that they might not have accepted, and they also give you grace because they go, oh, Isabella, she's so direct. Oh my God, But I know that she still likes me, and and it's all okay. So, I think that there's layers of how
Absolutely.
you dimensions. I
And it
like
depends
that.
on the relationship for sure.
Yeah, but you can get that relationship.
Yep.
You can win it for sure. It's just that it's not about me. It's all about the other person. First paying job, was it part-time, full-time? First real job? What do you consider?
So my first job, I think of when I was 16 years old. I was a senior in high school. I was working after
A senior
school.
in high school at 16? Well, you're smart.
My mom, when every other kid went to to camp, my mom sent me to summer school. And I was like, I don't understand why you're sending me to summer school. It's not like I'm having problems in school.
That's
on
the
honor
worst time to
roll.
go to summer school, too.
And she's like, to prepare you for the next year. Every year. Why can't I go to camp? You're going to summer school to prepare you for the next year. So going back to my first job.
Yeah.
My senior year. I worked with a representative with Xerox.
Oh.
Remember Xerox? Yeah. And he was a salesman, and he needed some help with his filing and his office duties. And it was a summer job. And I went in the first day, and he showed me remember those two big filing cabinets? This is before electronic records and computers.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were full of paper. And he opened them, and he took all the paper, and he dumped all the drawers on the floor.
Oh, my God.
And he
What
said,
a nightmare.
He says, I need those filed this week. And I was like, okay.
That's horrible.
That was my first job. But you know what? That experience taught me that no matter how huge a project may seem in the beginning, you chip at it and you chip at it and you chip at
Yeah,
it.
they say, eat the elephant one bite at a time. Yeah.
And after that, he was super organized. And then he kept me on for the rest of the year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you do DCT? The distributed co-op training? Yeah. I could see you doing that.
Really?
Going to school in the day and then your mom going, well, now you're going to start working too. We're going to get you some real work experience. And you
No,
did.
I didn't do that.
Well, yeah. You get credit for that, actually.
Yeah.
People do. Yeah. Yeah. Most influential person in your life and why?
Well, of course, my mom.
Yeah. Your dad doesn't get any credit.
He does get some credit, but my mom was really the person who was in charge of my education. She always felt as a child you needed to have academics, but you also needed to have extracurricular activities that were structured. So after school, I was in dance and swimming and, whatever activities she wanted to put me in to keep me busy until dinner time.
Oh, those are good things to do because
Yeah.
you want to tire those kids out.
But the challenge is when you're in high school and you have school and then you have extracurricular activities for 3-4 hours, you come home, you have dinner, and then I went to college prep high school, so I had 3 hours of homework. And so I would be exhausted. But you know what? It was training ground for the real world because
It also kept you out of trouble, though.
it did.
Yeah.
Because I'm too busy to think about getting in trouble.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's definitely going on there.
Do you appreciate that more now as an adult than you did when you were a kid? Or as a kid, were you pretty aware of what you were doing?
I was disgruntled.
I would
to
be.
be honest. I was like, all my friends are going to camp and they're having fun and I have to do schoolwork. Now, in retrospect, I appreciate it. I just wish she had a little bit more balance, which is interesting. So that's what I did with my daughter. Like, whenever I put her in camp, it was like a camp that had maybe reading and math, academics in the morning, and then the rest of the day she would do field trips and that. Because I do feel
Like art. You could go to art camp.
I feel like kids need time to decompress.
Everybody does.
Just like adults need vacation time. So I gave her a little bit more of a balance.
That's awesome.
So let's go back to talking about your business. What is your business? What is it that you do? Because we totally skipped that, even though everything we've been talking about is what you do in your business. I know we talked about, OD, what is the name of your business? All of that good stuff.
Yes. So the name of my business is the Sky Group, and we work with small and medium-sized businesses and helping them with their organizational assessments and structure and corporate culture and stuff like that. So what we found this year is we've been spending a lot of time training, especially back in the Virgin Islands. There's a need for that, which is one of the reasons I've been back and forth between St. Croix and Orlando. But I've also formed the company with my daughter. And she got her virtual assistant certification. And so she does virtual assistant support for the small businesses that we consult with. So.
And she has equity in the company as well?
Yes,
That's
she
awesome.
does have equity in the company because once I croak, it's all hers.
That is true. That is true.
That is called succession planning.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is another OD thing.
Yes.
By the way.
Awesome.
All of those things that we don't really think about that are organizational development are, the training and learning and the assessments. And it's all built around obviously, pre and post and seeing, was there growth? What happened? How do we track the metrics of it all? But change management, succession planning. It's HR is typically what we think of as the onboarding process and the recruitment process. But even people in HR, they cross over into this space where, Xaulanda and I are.
Yep.
Do you feel like you need to persuade people with your service, or do you think it's pretty well received and people seek out for your service?
Luckily, the clients that I've been able to onboard are either individuals that have worked with me before I started the company. So my daughter and I started the company in 2020. So we're a fairly young company. So the people who seek us out or we've worked with thus far are actually individuals that I've either worked with or have been able to experience us at work. So, for example, in August, we were sponsors, but also we worked with a company called Girlfriendism in the Virgin Islands, and we helped them put on their weekend Girlfriendism retreat. And so out of that, we've now gotten people saying, oh, can you help us with, our team and with our tactics and, helping us make our vision a reality. So I'm a very strategic thinker. That's one of my strengths. So once I understand the vision that you're trying to accomplish, I'm really good at working it back and saying, okay, within this timeline and with these resources that you have or these resources you're going to need to acquire, these are the tactics that we're able to do and the action items we're going to implement. And so I work with a lot of CEOs that are starting their companies or have companies and just want to take it to the next level.
That's awesome.
And that's my sweet spot. So I feel like I'm on vacation every day. I get to do what I love.
What do you think that future of that industry and jobs will look like in 2030? Because I feel like there's going to definitely be more automations. We're going to be a marriage between marketing and also we're very similar to marketing. It's all about attraction, engagement, retention, and it's like sales too. But there is this place where what is diversity and inclusion maybe going to look like in 2030? I don't know. What do you think? Throw any of those out there that you would like to
Well, we
share
say
your
2030 like it's so far away, but it's only it's less about 8 years from now.
Don't say that.
Yeah. And, based on the demographic shifts that we're seeing and as well as the social changes that we've seen within 2020 and moving forward, I think the future of work is definitely going to continue to integrate technology. But I also feel that this particular generation, the younger generation, are asking for more of a human element to the bottom line.
Yeah.
There has to be that balance and that meaningfulness and that autonomy to be able to work in the way that they are most productive. And I think that while folks were pushing for remote work before, COVID just validated that you can work. You don't need to be present at a desk to be productive.
Some jobs, yes, but
But others you don't. And so those I think are going to continue to be more and more flexible or probably from home. And then unfortunately, what I do see is those jobs that you have to be present. I'm seeing some companies going more and more to automation, which is concerning because then what do you do with those individuals? You're going to have to upskill them.
Yeah,
to
those that are
something.
vulnerable, that honestly cannot, that either don't have the education or there's a disability or an ability, whatever. But there's something that's going on and they're not going to be able to move up. So how do we include them? There's that inclusions again, to be able to have them contribute and also, take care of themselves.
And that's the concerning part for me as I see how the trends are moving forward. Because I think we're wrestling with that question, but we haven't come up with viable answers. And I'm not sure if, because the individuals that have to show up to work. So, for example, when you look at 2020, the people that were showing up to work were the essential workers at the grocery stores. And because of the wages that they're paid, a lot of them are working 2-3 jobs just to be able to survive. And so they don't have the time to focus on 8 years down the road. So those of us who are in this thought space need to include them to understand what their plights are and to see where the trends are going and try to figure out a very creative and innovative way to help upscale them, because then you're going to have a whole group of people that are completely out of work. And that's my major concern.
Yeah, that changes everything governmentally also. Mentoring advice. What is the best mentoring advice that you would like to pass on to our listeners?
When you say mentor, I immediately think of one of my CEOs, Mr. Jeff A. Nelson. And I said his name rarely because he's passed on. But what I feel with Mr. Nelson was that he was truly, genuinely invested in my success, whatever that looked like, whether I stayed with the company or I moved on. And he took the time to really understand what it is that I was trying to accomplish, to help me articulate my vision for where I wanted to go, help me strengthen my strengths, and help me figure out how to strengthen my opportunities for improvement. And so from a mentoring standpoint, I think we tend to think, or I've seen mentoring where you're just imparting information, like, oh, you don't have experience in this industry, so I'm going to mentor you and tell you about all the technical stuff. I think fundamentally mentoring is really investing in understanding what that mentee needs and how you can be a support to get them where they need to be.
Yeah, the next step.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's good advice, for sure. So how can our listeners find you? What social channels are you on? Do you want to share an email? Do you want to share, the office phone number? How do we find you?
So my website is www.xausky.com.
Okay, I'm glad you spelled that. Yeah.
So xausky.com is our website. If you're on LinkedIn, you can definitely reach out and connect with me personally. Xaulanda Simmonds-Emanuel. Xaulanda is Xaulanda, Simmonds, Simmonds hyphen Emmanuel, Emmanuel. And we do have a Xausky corporate page on LinkedIn, so you can reach us through that as well. My number is 340-513-4547.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank
So,
you.
Matt, we're going to be wrapping up our show here. So I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Cat 5 Studios. Thank you for the production team. We have Becca Coffey, associate producer intern, Nick Morales, our video editing intern, Our sound engineer is this gentleman sitting across from me, but
Thank you.
people that are listening don't know that. But he sits across from me, Matt Miller, and he is also running the podcast. And then we also have our music is Sophie Lloyd and Dave Francis and Charles Fleming. I'm going to throw all of those. Oh, and one more, Elijah Sutton. There we go. So employers, please visit us at Intern Pursuit, INTERNPURSUIT.tech. So you can find out how you also can work with amazing interns to help skill you and your people in your company and be recognized as an employer for change. So we want to just thank everybody that subscribes and listens to our show. So take us out, Matt.